In this edition of the Bucs Report, Tom Brady retires again. Who is going to be on this team next year? We'll talk about all of that and much more next on this edition of the Bucs Report. Let's go. Well, hello and welcome into this edition of the Bucs Report. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. As always, this podcast is free and available on all the major platforms. You can find it on the Bucs Report. Check it out online at bucsreport.com. You can find it on YouTube. Just search for the Bucs Report. And of course, you can find this audio podcast wherever you find your audio podcasts. My name is Dan Holme. You can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Bucs Minutecast. So in this episode, we are going to talk about the biggest topic, of course, is that Tom Brady retires again. And it's for real this time. It's not like a half-assed thing. I do believe, in fact, that he is done. We'll talk about that in the show. And then we're going to talk about, now that Brady has moved on, what is the face of this Bucs team going to look like? Let's face it, there were a lot of players that came to this team just because Tom Brady played here. Which of those players will remain here? Which one will Jason Licht resign? And which ones will move on? We'll talk about that. And then we're going to talk about the year that's to come and ultimately who is going to be the quarterback for your Tampa Bay Buccaneers. But just to get it going here, the biggest news that we found out was that Brady posted a video from a beach somewhere in Florida saying that he is retiring and he didn't want to have a bunch of fanfare like he did last time, but just suffices to say that I'm done. And, you know, he thanked his team members and his coaches, and he was pretty emotional, I got to say. And that was pretty much it. There was not a whole lot more to it other than that. And it was long suspected that he was going to retire, for one, or number two, that it was going to be his last season in Tampa. And as it turns out, he did retire. And the problem, I guess, that I have with this is that there's a lot of people that put all their eggs in the Tom Brady's going to be returning to this team basket. And now, ultimately, what are the Bucs going to do? This harkens back for me for last season when Tom Brady retired briefly. And everyone around the Bucs organization was up in arms saying, what are we going to do? Who's our next quarterback going to be? Is Kyle Trask going to be good enough? I guess, you know, that's one of those outliers there, is Trask going to be a good enough? We ultimately don't know, because we don't know what we have in Kyle Trask. He has been redshirted his entire career here. It's really hard to go all in on Kyle Trask. It is my belief that the Bucs will go out and sign another veteran quarterback. It's sort of like a competition type deal. And, you know, whoever's the better quarterback is going to be the starter of the Bucs next year. It could be Trask. It could be fill in the blank veteran out there. I guess it remains to be seen. And then the other option out there, I guess, is that the Bucs go out and draft another quarterback. That seems like the least logical option for me. I believe that the Bucs have someone potentially in Kyle Trask. They ultimately don't know what they have in him yet, but to rule him out is not an option. Seems a bit short-sighted. As we know, Gabbert is up on a new deal, or his contract was up. So either they're going to re-sign Gabbert or he's going to move on. And, you know, it's my belief that they would be better off just moving on from Gabbert. We ultimately know what we have in him. And I think that at this point of his career, he's a pretty solid backup quarterback, but I don't think that he has what it takes to be a starting quarterback in this league day in and day out. And you know, to take this Bucs team to where it has to go. And what do I mean when I say that? Is that this team struggled for so many years that Brady kind of came to this team and changed the culture of everything. If you look back on the lean years when it was Jameis Winston out there just struggling, and quarterbacks that came before him, there were some rough years. I mean, you can go back to the previous year that they won the Super Bowl, and then in between that, there were quite a few of lean years in between then. So it is going to be, I guess, a bit of a culture shock for Bucs fans out there as they're kind of like, uh-oh, we're back here again before Brady came here, before the three-ring circus came into town. Because let's face it, he changed everything in Tampa. And I think that, ultimately Bucs fans, we will forever be in Tom Brady's debt for what he did for this team to bring this team back to prominence and to bring it back to being a Super Bowl winner and a contender on a year in and year out basis. We can never say enough good things for what he did for this team. And it just kind of puts him in a tough position because the uncertainty now, right? That's the biggest thing, is the uncertainty and who is going to be the quarterback and lead this team. There are, pretty much everyone that's possible out there is a potential candidate. Ultimately, who is it going to be? Brady's impact on the Bucs is immeasurable, taking them from a team that had missed the playoffs for 12 years in a row to a franchise with another championship with back-to-back division titles for the first time in their 47-year history. He played only 3 seasons, but if you count playoff games, he has more touchdown passes, 121, than anyone in team history, and the second most passing yards, period. So those are quite the list of accomplishments that Brady has done in his, relatively short time on this team. And, ultimately it was something that was going to have to happen anyway. At the end of the day, if he did come back, would it have really mattered? Was he going to take this team where it was where they wanted to go, is to win another Super Bowl? I ultimately don't think, even if he did not retire and say he did sign a new deal with the Bucs and decided to come back, I don't think with this core that's here right now, I don't think they have what it takes in the tank to go to that next level. I do think that, there's probably going to be some rough patches before this team is a competitive team again. To say that this team is just going to move on from this, I think, is looking at it with Buccaneers colored glasses on, creamsicle colored glasses, if you will. And I'm sorry, I'm not drinking that creamsicle Kool-Aid like everyone else is. I do think that there is going to be some bumps in the road, like I said, because you have some players that are going to be moving out, some expiring contracts. What is the face of this team going to be, and what players are going to want to come here? I think that ultimately what it's going to boil down to is they're going to want to know who is the quarterback of this team. If I'm coming to the Buccaneers, Brady's old team, that's fine. Who is the quarterback right now? So I think that's one of the things they're going to have to try and solidify. Of course, there's players on this team that are loyal to this team. You take a look at Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, for example. I don't think you have to worry about some of those players that have that loyalty. But it is interesting that there's already the rumor mill swirling out there, and quite a few rumors out there. Rumors is what I'm saying. I don't think there's any smoke to the fire of Mike Evans going to the Chicago Bears. For whatever reason, I hear more and more memes and different things on Twitter talking about Mike Evans going to the Chicago Bears. I think that's crazy. I think if you start getting to the point where we're moving on from pieces like that, I think that, more problems lie ahead. But just to take a look at Brady in his 23-year career, 7 Super Bowl champions, 5 Super Bowl MVPs, 3-time league MVP, 89,214 regular season passing yards, first all time, 649 regular season touchdowns, first all time, 13,400 playoff passing yards, first all time, 88 playoff touchdowns, first all time. Do I need to say anything else? If there was ever a perfect moment for Tom Brady to ride out into the sunset, this is it. I think that ultimately we all know why he came back here. He wanted to win one more Super Bowl with this team, and he gave it all up. In a lot of ways, he gave up his relationship to his wife. I know there's probably a lot more going on there than just the football thing, but in a lot of ways, he gave up his wife, and he came back to tarnish his record. I almost think to a certain extent, if he would have just hung up the cleats, if you will, at the end of last season, I think that, his reputation would be a little bit better. And, I think that one of the things that Brady was concerned about is going out victorious and going out in a whimper. And I think that he was starting to slowly scale his way down from victorious. I know that, his history precedes him, and his records that I just rattled off for you there really kind of speak to who he is, and nothing can ever take that away from him. But to a certain extent, if he came back and just continued to try and knock out those goals, I just don't think it would have happened. And I think that it would have made his reputation would made it look that much worse. So again, some interesting days ahead for this Bucs team as they chart uncharted waters, that for quite some time. I know that there's been a lot of indecision around this team for quite some time, but it is interesting now what the Bucs will have to do. All right, so after the break here, we're going to talk about Brady's contract. Yes, even though he's retired, his contract is on the books and has some implications. What are those implications? We'll talk about that after the break. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report. I'm so glad you decided to join me today. In this episode, we're talking about the biggest thing, of course, is Tom Brady's retirement, and just listening to different people, around Twitter, and just the emotions that are evoked when we talk about Tom and what he meant to this team. I don't think that you can ever say enough for what he did to this team and this franchise. And and no, everyone has nothing but positive things to say about Brady for the most part. I guess there's some haters out there that don't like him because of what he's accomplished, but those people are generally miserable people in general anyway. It helps the Bucs for salary cap purposes that Brady is retiring and not signing elsewhere. The team should now be able to take $35 million in dead money counting against the cap from its old contract and shift about $24 million to 2024, a big help for 2023. If the Bucs had a ton of cap room, maybe it'll be better to take all the cap hit now, but they'll have to be way over the cap. So $24 million in cap relief has a huge impact on being able to find and field a competitive team, which is the priority for everyone back in 2023. So that's what I'm talking about, is just, even though he is not on this team anymore, it's the avoidable years and all that kind of thing that kind of factor in a lot of ways. He ended up helping out the Bucs. And that was a good thing to do, because if he would have gone to another team, that would have only complicated things a little bit more. So a good thing to happen towards the end of his career there. I'd expect the Buccaneers and Brady to agree to a restructured contract at a minimum of $1.165 million salary for 2023. This will allow the Bucs to carry his contract at a $11.9 million cap figure through June 1st, after which they can process his retirement. The automatic void date on Brady's deal will also need to be moved back from its current March 15th deadline. The maneuver allows the $35.104 million of dead cap left on Brady's contract to be split into $10.776 million for 2023 and $24.32 million for 2024. Again, this is accounting stuff here at the end of the day, but when you take a look at it, there was so much positioning and that kind of stuff that went on to make this Bucs competitive. What it was spreading his contract out over a lengthy period of time to be in what they call win now mode. And guess what? The bill's up. The Bucs have got to pay it. They went all in. They won a Super Bowl. They went to the playoffs. I ultimately think it was a gamble and it paid off. It got them another ring. And at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, is winning another Super Bowl. This franchise has 2 Super Bowls. There are quite a few teams in the league out there that have won 0 Super Bowls. So, right now it seems like it could be a bit doom and gloom. But when you look at it in the grander scale, I think that the Bucs are going to be okay. It's just that it's going to take a little bit of time before they reach that kind of point. So the biggest question now for the Bucs, of course, is finding that number 1 quarterback. Finding a veteran quarterback to compete for third-year pro Kyle Trask for the starting job won't be cheap, and Tampa will likely be limited to a modest salary as opposed to the biggest names available in March. Trask has waited for 2 years for the chance to take over for Brady, but the Bucs Bucs will want to bring in a more proven commodity, at least for competition. All more for half the Bucs defense starts this past season were made by players who are now free agents. So there is a lot of questions, and it's not just about the quarterback position. It's about what players are going to come back and what is the face of this Buccaneers team going to be for years coming forward. For me, I kind of knew that this particular season was going off the rails the moment I saw Ryan Jensen get injured in the preseason. I talked about it on my other podcast, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers Minute Cast, that I had a pit in my stomach that I'm like, this isn't good. I didn't know how bad it was going to be, but I just knew that ultimately when Ryan Jensen went out, that things were going to go poorly, and they did, as there was a myriad of different injuries that followed this Bucs team this last season. Many could point to the fact that Byron Leftwich was kind of incapable all season, and that Leftwich and Brady did not have a good relationship together, and that ultimately they should have left a lot of the offensive play calling to Brady, and maybe they would have done better. I guess it's a lot of things that are going to have to be looked on in hindsight. I would also say that Todd Bowles, for example, I don't think that Todd Bowles, as the head coach of Tom Brady for what was his last year in the NFL, was a great decision. I mean, he was kind of an afterthought. I hate to say it, but when Bruce Arians said that he was no longer going to be the head coach, it's pretty much like they went to Todd Bowles and they said, hey, you want to be the head coach? And he's like, hey, sure, why not? There wasn't a vetting process. There was no hiring process. The Bucs did not go out and see what other options they had available. They just went in-house, and what happened? Blew up in their face. And for the people that want to say that Todd Bowles did a good job, I can point to many different things, including clock mismanagement, taking timeouts, that sort of thing, things that should have just been commonplace for him. And I understand that he didn't get a chance to choose his coaching staff around him, so I know that he was limited in a bit that way. But for him to want to take on the defense calling plus take on the head coaching responsibilities, I just think that it was more than he could handle. And there were moments towards the end of the season, most notably when the Bucs made it to the playoffs with a losing record, and everyone is like, see, what are you talking about? This team rules. I'm like, you guys understand that they're in the playoffs right now with a below 500 record. That doesn't feel really good. That's like stealing someone's money that can't, protect themselves. Great, you took their money, but you stole it from a person that can't protect themselves. That feels horrible. So it seems like kind of a shallow victory, if you will, this entire last season. But now everything is in the rear view mirror. There's hindsight and 2020 and all that kind of stuff. But ultimately, for me as a Bucs fan, that's the thing that bugged me the most, is they went all in on a quarterback that is the greatest of all time, and they had a head coach that had not a lot of experience. And I know a lot of people will point to the 3 years that he had with the New York Jets, and for me, in real time, that doesn't really matter. That isn't the same caliber at all. So the Bucs have to pick themselves up and move on. But all I'm going to tell Bucs fans out there is be prepared for some lean years going forward. This isn't going to be like the Brady years. You might see 2 or 3 years that are pretty rough around here. Could be a lot more. If you follow this team for quite some time, you know exactly what I'm talking about. This team could be wandering out in the wilderness for some time. And I just think to a certain extent, we kind of took for granted what Brady brought to this team and thought, that even after Brady's gone, this will all continue. It's not going to be the case. There's not another Tom Brady out there that's available. And even if they weren't coming to this team. And let's face it, it's a changing of the guard at the QB position anyway. Take a look at the biggest quarterbacks out there right now. It's Mahomes and it's Burrow, and it's a young guy's game now. Rodgers and Brady, they're the old guard and they're on their way out. I don't know what's left next for Rodgers. I hear a lot of rumors that he's going to go to the Jets. But in any event, it seems like kind of a last gasp for his career as well. So it is going to be a big change here. It's the young guys, the young gunslingers that are taking over. And I think the face of the NFL at the QB position is going to be a lot different. All right. So after the break here, we're going to talk about what free agents are on this Bucs team and which one of them will come back. And are there any moves that the Bucs should make in the offseason before they start the next season? We'll talk about that next. All right, welcome back into this edition of the Bucs Report. In this episode, we are talking about the Brady retirement, of course, but it is more than just Brady. It is taking a look at the free agents on this team and which one of them will be returning. You take a look at the biggest one, Lavonte David and Jamel Dean, two big names on this team. What's the face of this Bucs team going to look like if you're even minus Lavonte David? That is the biggest guy on this list. In front of me, I have here it is Lavonte David, Jamel Dean, Sean Murphy Bunting, another big one, Anthony Nelson, Mike Edwards, Akeem Hicks, and then it goes down the list with Perriman and Stinney and Wells and Bernard, et cetera, et cetera. But the biggest players that they need to take care of, in my assessment, are Lavonte David and Jamel Dean, and I would also put Sean Murphy Bunting in that as well. The Bucs are in the top 100 free agents, but they're high. Jamel Dean, fifth overall, projected to 4 years at $68 million, and Lavonte David, sixth, 2 years, $22 million. Can the Bucs afford to keep either at those values? And that's the tough thing. Is I do think that they should prioritize Lavonte David and Jamel Dean. Do I think that both of those guys are coming back next year? I'm sorry to say, I really don't think that they're going to be able to find a way to keep both of those guys here. So it is a bit of a somber thing, knowing not that only that Brady left, but it could be Jamel Dean, it could be Lavonte David, and a lot of big players on this Bucs team that we've all grown to love. Could be moving on, and it's going to be tough going forward. This is the most difficult part for the front office, moving on from players who were central parts in the success of the past. But it starts here, and will suggest 4 cuts for cap purposes. Left tackle Donovan Smith, running back Leonard Fournette, kicker Ryan Suckup, and tight end Cameron Brate, who is pretty much resigned to the fact that he played his last game as a Buck. The cap savings add up to $19.2 million. Smith saves $9.95 million. Fournette 3.5, Suckup 3.75, and Brate $2 million. And, I just don't think that there is a spot for Brate on this team anymore. I think that they have enough other options out there that he just doesn't make sense to come back here. So, again, I think that he's resigned to the fact that he's going to move on to bigger and better things. That takes me to Leonard Fournette. And how that's interesting is the breakout season of Rachaad White, right? He kind of impressed more than I think anyone thought was going to be the case. He came in here and killed it out there. I have nothing but positive things to say about Rachaad White. And I think that Tom Brady would say the same thing. A very studious young man that came into camp with a notebook and his pen and was taking notes. And you don't see that level of dedication in players, and especially not in young players. So I think that Rachaad White, if they decide to move on from Fournette, would be a lock for that number one running back position. I do think that they have a good number 2. I do ultimately think, and I hear a lot of flack on this, I do think that Keyshawn Vaughn is a viable option. In the brief glimpses that we saw, I think he did a pretty good job, all things considered. So, just considering that this is going to be a team that's going to look a little bit different and maybe not have all the resources that they had in previous years, I do think a Rachaad White and a Keyshawn Vaughn combo isn't that bad. So it's something to consider out there. The other option that they have, and I believe he is a free agent as well, is Giovanni Bernard. If they could find a way to bring him back on the cheap as just like a third option, I'm not against it. My biggest issue with Gio Bernard is that he is prone to being bit by the injury bug. But the guy does have some wheels to him and can move if he's not injured and they actually play him on a somewhat regular basis. Many will point to that botched punt moment and they'll judge him based on that. But I'm not saying that Gio Bernard is going to be a starter by any means, but a good person to add to the mix. If they're just looking for familiarity, that kind of thing. So you take a look at Rachaad White, you take a look at Keyshawn Vaughn, and then you take a look at that. There are some options at the running back position going forward. But taking a look at Perriman, another guy that they picked up as a depth piece. And if you ask me, impressed. I really liked Perriman. I liked Nassib coming back. I like what he brought to this team. Miller, that's another player that's interesting out there for me. I've always been a Scotty Miller fan. If he's going to come back, it just seems that there's just never a spot for him on this team. But maybe things have changed a little bit, considering, that they're going to be going in a bit of a different direction. Maybe they will find a person, that's better than Scotty Miller, or maybe they'll just land on Scotty Miller because they can maybe get him on the cheap. And then Gabbert, again, I think that he played his last game as a Buck, and ultimately, I just don't think that he brings enough to the table. The Bucs move forward not only without Brady, but the significant salary cap limitations as a result of contracts in the last 2 years designated to maximize the talent surrounding him and contend for another title. Tampa Bay is about $55 million over the 2023 salary cap of $224.8 million right now, but Brady retiring rather than playing for another team should give the Bucs an extra $24 million in cap relief, pushing that money to the 2024 season. So if in a roundabout way, thanks Tom Brady for retiring and not moving on to another team, that's a good thing. Evans is entering the final year of his contract, and Godwin has 2 years left, but they're both model citizens and reliable talent. So if you're going to continue to borrow from the future for cap relief, those are the guys you want to do with it. And here, I agree to that wholeheartedly. If there's two players, considering that it is going to be a change around this team, I would go all in on Godwin and Evans, two huge receivers on this team, model citizens, like they said. Everyone loves Evans in Tampa. The same goes for Godwin. Evans is a little bit more involved in the community, that kind of thing, but both of those guys love them. I would do anything to keep Godwin and Evans here. Just two big things. So to close out the show, the biggest thing now is the offensive coordinator position. As we all know, and Todd Bowles, the head coach, he did what he could do, but then you take a look at Byron Leftwich, and he is the fall guy. But do they have someone better that's available out there? That's the question. It's easy to point at Leftwich and go, you're the reason that this Bucs team was horrible this year. But is that ultimately the case? When Brady was underthrowing and overthrowing and Mike Evans' routes were messed up, was that his fault? Maybe a little bit. One of the things that was said about Leftwich is that he was predictable. The Bucs offense was predictable. Okay, so that's a valid point. He runs the offense. Do one of these new guys offer the Bucs a good option in that position? That is the question. So taking a look at some of the candidates out there: Jim Bob Cooter, Ronald Curry, Clint Kubiak, Todd Monken, a familiar name, Keenan McCardle, Dan Pitcher, and Shea Tierney. If I'm going to pick one of those guys just from that list, I'm going to go with Dan Pitcher. I like what he has done with Burrow in Cincinnati. Just knee-jerk reaction. That's who I'd be all in on. If you're going to say, Dan, you host the show, who are you going to go with? That's who I'm going to go with. I just like what he brings to this team. I know that it's a very fickle business, you could say, but, the Bengals got eliminated early again. Do we want – it's all nonsense. I mean, you're not going to get the perfect person that wins every Super Bowl. I'm just saying, based on those candidates that I saw, that's who I would go with. Knee-jerk reaction. That's who I'm going with. So it is going to be some interesting days ahead. It's just kind of a sinking feeling, and I don't want to be a pessimist, but sometimes a bit of that creeps into me, and I think to myself, we're back here again, aren't we? We're back here to the pre-Brady days, and he can't save us anymore. People were elated when he unretired last season, and they thought that it was going to be the second coming of Christ. I swear to God, they thought that they were going to win another Super Bowl. As it turns out, they got eliminated in the first game of the playoffs. Things don't always go the way you think they're going to go, right? And that definitely was the case for this Bucs this last season. Things did not go the way that they thought. And another first game exit when they had grander plans. And it's a bit unfortunate. And, Ryan Jensen coming back at the last moment. There were so many great feel-good moments on this team that you thought maybe this is going to be a Disney movie. And they're going to make a deep push. And do they ultimately have what it takes in the tank to win another Super Bowl? It was just a figment of our imaginations, as it wasn't meant to be. So just as Bucs fans, you got to stay strong, knowing that it's going to be maybe a lean year or two there, perhaps 3, as this team tries to refine itself. And I think you're a bit foolish if you think that it's going to the Bucs are going to move on flawlessly and they're just going to continue where they left off with Brady. that's just not the case. So some tough years ahead for the Bucs potentially, but hopefully they can get it structured, put it together the right way. I ultimately think that if this Bucs team wants any success, they're going to have to move on from Todd Bowles as well. I think if the Bucs would have done anything, they should have just wiped the slate clean, all of it, just put it all in the circular file, get rid of it, start all over again. And I hear Rick Stroud and all these people saying, well, you can't keep changing coaches, you can't keep changing coaches. Hey, they pretty much gutted everyone else out. You may as well just go with Todd Bowles and go ahead and just flick them off and start anew, get a different coaching system in here. That's my big thing on it. I wish they would have got Peyton. He ended up going to the Broncos, but in any case, the Bucs do have some interesting decisions to make as they go into this off season and they plan for the next season ahead. All right, once again, I want to thank you for joining me on this edition of the Bucs Report. We're headed for some interesting times ahead as Bucs fans here. I'll talk to you next time.